I need to walk through my entire string. So I'm going to start at 0, so I need some sort of counter for that. So while counter is less than my input dot length, I'm going to walk through this thing and then add 1 to counter each time. So if that thing is a letter, how do I know that thing is a letter? Well, let's start off with just, can I figure out if it's an A? So input.char at counter is an A. I need another way of keeping track of how many there are. So if it's an A, I'm going to add 1 to the total. And when I'm all done, let's print out total. All right. Now, shame on me for not testing this before now. I probably should have tested this long before this point. Normally, you want to type in about 3 or 4 lines of code and make sure it works. So I'm going to say 1, enter a sentence. A thing A. So there's 2 letters that are an A in this case. How do I figure out if this is a letter in general, though? I want to skip spaces or punctuation or any goofy symbols. I just want letters. Well, there's another class we need to know about called capital C character. So let's go look that up in the Java API. So character, capital C, channel, char set, character, there it is. Capital C character class wraps a primitive type char as an object. Interesting. Capital C character. Need some more background information at this point. So we've looked at primitive types. Int, char, boolean, double. Turns out there's a few more. There's a byte, short, and long, which are different sizes of integers, and there's a float, which is less precise than a double. Each of these things you're allowed to do basic operations on, but there are some utility classes that help these different guys out. So there is a capital I integer class. We've already used one of the methods from that, actually, integer.parseInt. These two things work together. An int is a primitive type, and integer is an object type which wraps an int. So whenever you are not allowed to use a primitive type, you can always use the wrapper type, the object type integer, and basically put a number inside of that. Also, there's a bunch of utility functions in integer that allow you to do things like change a string to an int. It turns out there's classes like this for all of these different primitive types. So there's a character class, which has a capital C. There's a capital B Boolean class, and there's a capital D double class. And likewise, capital F float and all the other primitive types. So character has a number of things that allow us to deal with characters and a number of checks and a number of conversions. All right, so what all can we do? We can find out what the ASCII value of a char is. Useful. You can see is digit. That sounds useful. So you give it a character and it tells you, is it a digit, true or false? Okay. Is letter. I like that even better. In fact, that's what I'm going to use. So when it says static, you have to use the name of the class. So capital C character dot is letter, much like integer.parseInt. Is lowercase. Is space. Is uppercase. There's also things like 2 uppercase and 2 lowercase. Very useful things. Okay. So I wanted to check to see if something was a letter. Now I can't use this particular equals equals. What I have to do instead is character dot is letter. And then the character is this whole thing here. So much like math, parentheses are resolved from the innermost to the outermost. So charat is the innermost thing. So it figures out the character at this particular point in the string. And then it takes that one character and passes it into is letter. So that whole char then gets passed to is letter. And then that whole thing gets resolved to true or false, which is part of the if statement. So parentheses are actually, just like in mathematics, it tells you order of operations. All right, so that's kind of cool. Let's try it out. 1, a number of things. 15 letters. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Perfect. Now this little loop here where I have a counter and I basically walk through the entire string and add 1 to it every time, this happens a lot. In fact, it happens so much they actually made a shortcut for it. So I can do exactly the same thing as this loop here in much shorter lines of code. This brings us to another kind of loop. Besides a while loop, there's something called a for loop. So a for loop basically combines 3 parts of this loop into one. It has this thing where you create the counter in it, and then you use a semicolon. It has the while part, and then a semicolon, and then the thing you do at the end where you add 1 to it each time. So if I want to do these lines of code down here, all of this stuff here is precisely the same as these things here. The for loop just allows you to do it faster. So we have our counter, we started at 0. This is the while portion. It's going to keep doing this while this is true, and then counter plus plus. It turns out there's a third kind of loop called a do while loop. So if I wanted to make sure this always happened once, this do while loop here, where you put the while loop at the end of the brace and the do beforehand, while loop having a semicolon, this would actually execute your code at least once and then do the while loop at the end of it. The only difference between a while loop and a do while loop is that one thing. A do while loop always happens once, a while loop might not happen at all. All right, so that allows me to go through my code and add 1 to it each time. Very good. Let me pull the system out, print line out of it. Okay, so I can now count up all the letters and figure that out. What happens if I want to go through and check individual letters? So I'm going to need some sort of counter, like this total thing, except I'm going to need it for A, how many A's I've seen, how many B's I've seen. That sounds like I need 26 variables. I don't really want to create 26 variables. Fortunately, Java has a way of creating a whole bunch of variables and giving it a simple name, and that's called an array. So first of all, I should do counting second. It says, hey, counting second, what are you talking about? There is no counting second, so I should make that. Void counting second. By the way, occasionally I will put public on the front of these. This special keyword at the front, you can have public, you can have protected, and you can have private. Those things have to do with when you have classes that are talking to each other between projects, what they're allowed to look at. Public means everyone can use this particular method, so my Android project up here could use counting second. If I say private, that means only counting problems can use this. No other code, not even in the same project, can use it. If I say protected, all of the files that are in my current project, my current package is what it's called, they can use this particular method, but something like this Android class out here can't use it. For almost all of our purposes, it's not going to matter that much. All right, so the second one is counting each letter from the console. Okay, I need a way of keeping track of all of my different letters. I'm going to assume that upper and lowercase are going to be counted the same way, and I'm going to have to eventually convert that. So I need something like my int total thing, except I need 26 of them. So what I do is I use these square brackets here. Notice these are square brackets. They are not parentheses, nor are they braces. So this says I'm going to have a series of integers that I'm going to name total. And I'm going to go ahead and create 26 of them. So this makes 26 slots, and they are all named under the name total. If I want to use one of these, so let's say I want to use the 0 slot. Keep in mind this count starts numbering at 0, and so it goes from 0 to 25, because that's 26 slots. It's 1 through 25 plus the 0 slot is 26 of them. Watch out for that. You are likely to run off the end of your array if you try and grab slot number 26. So I could, for example, say total equals 5, and then print out total 0. So if I say 2 down here, this shows me 5, because I just put 5 in there.